It's the world-famous story of the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe. Now, if you've ever read the books or seen some of the films, have you ever stopped to think just about how strange it is, really? That this plain and otherwise honestly boring piece of furniture has become an iconic cultural phenomenon on par with some of the greatest icons of otherworldly transportation in the 20th century. There's something about this fancy wooden box that fascinates our minds and it captivates our hearts. And today, we're going to go deeper into the wardrobe, so to speak, by exploring its origin story. And along the way, we're going to be looking for answers about some of the biggest questions about this portal into another world. Now, people love this channel because we're not afraid to ask the big questions. We also seek out the truth no matter where it may lead. And it's in that same spirit that makes us love everything about today's sponsor, Boyce College. If you're thinking about college, the big question is, are you on track to become future ready? Predicting what the work of the future will look like in a world that's inundated with change is impossible. But preparing for that world is not. And students who build their college experience upon the foundation of eternal truths will be faithfully equipped for whatever comes next. That's why Boyce College exists, to train, educate, and prepare students to serve Christ faithfully throughout the entirety of their lives, no matter where God calls them. Those goals are accomplished by focusing on 3 educational outcomes for every graduate: keeping faith first, becoming future ready, and growing more kingdom focused. To learn how keeping faith first produces graduates who are future ready and kingdom focused, please go to boycecollege.com/faith. Now, you may have noticed this great new mug on my table, and I'm going to be telling you next week how you can win this along with a bundle of giveaways from Boyce College, so be sure to check back next week. Now, in the meantime, before we get started today, just a bit of a heads up. If you've never read the books before, there will obviously be some spoilers along the way. But even if you've read the books, there's going to be some exciting new ideas here for you to dive into. So let's get started. It's time to leave the Shadowlands behind and step into a world that's more real than our own. It's time to follow me into the wardrobe. According to Narnian history, the first human being to travel to Narnia through the interdimensional portal device, known as the wardrobe, located in the land of Spare was an 8-year-old English girl named Lucy Pevensie. The wardrobe itself was located in a large English mansion, home of Professor Digory Kirke, whom we'll talk more about later. Now, the house itself was rumored to be magical, and it was actually a famous historical home. They actually even offered guided tours to groups of visitors on a regular basis. Now, the house was certainly unique, but by all accounts, the wardrobe's appearance wasn't actually even that unusual. It was just a standard wooden wardrobe, the kind with a looking glass on it, and it was used to store fur coats of all things. It was kind of big enough for 4 children to hide inside anyway, and strangely enough, it was kept inside a large, otherwise completely empty room in the farthest, most remote corners of this old house. Now, what's interesting is that the portal inside the wardrobe wasn't always open. In fact, most of the time when a person stepped inside, they just find the back of the wardrobe with hooks hanging on it. The portal itself only opened a total of 3 times, and each time it stayed open just long enough to allow those who had entered into Narnia to return again. And when Lucy stumbled through the wardrobe into Narnia for the first time, she wasn't even aware that the wardrobe was magical. She was just using it as a convenient hiding spot. So, what was the story here? Where did the wardrobe come from? Well, the wardrobe's beginnings actually start at the very beginning of Narnia itself. As a young child, Professor Digory Kirke had actually traveled to Narnia with the use of magical rings, along with his friend Plummer. Now, like the Pevensies, Digory and Polly sort of stumbled into Narnia themselves through a random series of events, but when they arrived, they actually witnessed the first moments of Narnian history, the very creation of the world itself, which was being sung into existence by Aslan the lion. Now, there's a lot more to this story, but during their time in Narnia, Digory and Polly were sent on a quest by Aslan to bring back a silver apple from Aslan's own garden, which was located past the Great Waterfall in the extremely remote part of the world known as the Western Wild. Digory did eventually retrieve the apple, which was planted next to the Narnian River and grew very rapidly into what would later become known as the Tree of Protection. Now, this tree was actually crucial for Narnia's early peaceful development as a nation, as its magic was used to keep the White Witch Jadis out of the kingdom of Narnia for 9 centuries, until it died in 900 NT. Now, before Digory and Polly went back, Aslan gave Digory one of the apples from the Tree of Protection, which had some magical properties itself, which I won't mention here. However, Digory planted the core in his backyard, which grew so quickly you could see it growing. Even though the soil of our world didn't allow it to bear magical silver fruit like it would have produced in Narnia, it did produce some of the best apples in England. And more importantly, the sap in the inner core of the tree still retained enough magic that it maintained an interdimensional connection with Narnia. So much so that when the wind blew in Narnia, its leaves would shudder here on Earth, even on a calm day. Now, as I mentioned, in 900 NT, the Tree of Protection died in Narnia, and in our world, Digory's tree was blown down during a terrible storm. Now, by this time, Digory had moved away from his childhood home into the mansion that his family had inherited. Of course, this tree was very important to Digory, so instead of just having it chopped up for firewood, he had it made into, you guessed it, a wardrobe. He had the wardrobe sent to the Kirke mansion, and presumably there it sat for many years, in that quiet, empty room waiting for the day that it would reveal its magical origins to 4 sons of Adam and daughters of Eve who would fulfill the Golden Age prophecy, as the wardrobe showed them the way to its Narnian home. So that's the origin story of the wardrobe. But even knowing all that, there's still some interesting questions left to ask about the nature and the source of the wardrobe's magic. You see, if you've read the books or seen the movies, you'll know that the wardrobe's magic didn't seem to be controllable or even predictable at all. One minute it's a portal to another universe, and the next it's just an ordinary piece of furniture. In fact, it seems that the wardrobe's portal only opened 3 times in its entire history. There's even the question of whether or not the wardrobe's creator, Professor Kirke, even knew the wardrobe was magic. On the one hand, he had stored it away in a far back corner of the mansion in a large, unused, otherwise empty room. Now, you would think that this would be his most prized possession in the whole world. I mean, it was his only physical reminder of his time in Narnia, the only reminder of his mother's salvation, and it marked the moment in his life where he was forever changed for the better. So why hide it away? Unless you knew that it had a power and potential danger, and you needed to keep it in a safe place, especially in a house where strangers were led around on a regular basis. And then there's that crazy coincidence with the fur coats. I mean, what are the odds that the wardrobe would be stocked with the very item that the children would need to survive in this wintry hellscape? I mean, is it possible that Digory intentionally left the coats there? Kind of like spacesuits hanging in an airlock of a spaceship. Well, it's hard to say for sure, but I'll point out that Digory left Narnia long before Jadis ever cast her spell of eternal winter. So, unless he received knowledge from some other interdimensional source, it's hard to imagine that he could have ever planned any of this. But that's kind of my point. You see, Digory seemed to believe one very important thing about trying to get to Narnia, that it was impossible. If you tried, that is. In his own words, he said, "Once a king in Narnia, always a king in Narnia. But don't go trying to use the same route twice. Indeed, don't try to get there at all. It'll happen when you're not looking for it." So even if Digory knew the wardrobe was magic, he knew something much more important. It was a magic that no human could ever hope to control. But that doesn't mean it was random or uncontrollable. In fact, we know that the wardrobe was intentionally opened for the Pevensies and only for the Pevensies. Why? Well, because Aslan himself did it. He brought them there to Narnia, and he did it for a very important reason. "In your world," Aslan explained, "I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name." That was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. So whether the magic was in the wardrobe or used on the wardrobe, one thing is for sure: the source was a deeper magic that existed before the dawn of time. And that is the true story of the origin of the wardrobe. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I don't often do this, but if you enjoyed it and you think that the world needs more Narnia, I want to encourage you to take a moment and subscribe. We are building a community here that will serve as a voice to those in Hollywood that are making the next Narnian films, and we need you to be a part of this community. So just take a moment, subscribe, and let them know that you're here and you care. We look forward to seeing you next time as we take another journey into the wardrobe.